this button. There we go.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We're happy to have you here tonight. If you're not joining us live, this is going to be recorded so you guys can watch it later. My name is Leah Atnat, and I work for Maryland Humanities on the Maryland History Day program. So you all are working on your research projects right now. Students all over the state and all over the country are working on similar projects with the same theme. It's my job to travel all over Maryland and make sure that students and teachers have all the resources they need to do this project to the best of your ability. So you might recognize me. I might have joined your classroom at some point this school year. So I am here tonight to give you guys a little bit of extra help. So this is our first ever office hour. We're going to try to have these every month to help you guys. This one is going to be more focused on conducting research because I think that's where a lot of people are in the process right now. But we're going to invite you to ask questions about any part of the History Day research project that you are curious about. So I know everyone is sort of in a different place with the project. Maybe you just picked your topic. Maybe you haven't even picked your topic yet. So whatever you're curious about, you are welcome to ask a question about it. If you're wondering where to ask a question, you can go down in the YouTube page to the description, and there's a link to a Google form. So you can click on that link to ask your question. We also ask you what your topic is and your name, and you can just put your first name, or I don't think you have to even put it if you don't want to. If you are not able to use a Google form for whatever reason, if Google is blocked on your school device or anything like that, you can use the phone number that is in the description there and just text your question to it. And if you could, when you text your question, if you could also include what county you're writing us from, that would be very useful to us just so that we know who we're reaching out there. So as we're doing this office hour, how I've got things organized is I've got a few tips that I want to give you guys. So we're sort of going to go back and forth between me giving a tip and then me answering one of your questions. So I'm going to start us off right now by giving a few tips. So my first tip for you all is to develop a research strategy. So here's what that can look like. The first part of it is to do some preliminary research about your topic. And there are a few different things that this preliminary research accomplishes. First of all, what is preliminary research? It's like the research before the research. That's what preliminary means, just before. So the preliminary research is going to do three things. It's going to help you develop a broad base of knowledge about your topic and its time period. It's going to be important for you to know the basics before you dive deeper into the primary source research. The second thing that it's going to do is it's going to help you narrow your topic down even more. So if you pick a really big topic like women's suffrage, for example, there are a lot of different directions that you can go with that, but you can't know how to narrow your topic until you know some of the details of that movement. So after you start doing a little bit of research and reading some encyclopedia articles, reference works, you can go to history.com, things like this, you'll start to notice some things that catch your eye that you might find interesting. And then you might decide to narrow it down to, again, if you're doing women's suffrage, you might pick an individual who stands out to you. You might look at Margaret Brent, who was from Maryland and who fought for women's rights in the 1600s. You might look at Mary Church Terrell, who was a part of the late 1800s, early 1900s women's suffrage movement, and who was also one of the first Black women to get a college degree. Or you might look at some of the tactics they use, like hunger strikes and music. So, but you won't know any of that until you start doing a little bit of research. The third thing that preliminary research can do is it shows you if you have enough material there, if there are going to be enough sources to answer your research question, if there's enough of a story. Which brings me to my next tip develop a central research question. So the research question is also going to help you dig deeper into your topic instead of just being very broad and trying to find all the information that you can about the topic. It lets you ask a more focused question. So you might say, what were the two sides of the debate in the women's suffrage movement? How did women make their case? What was the side of their opposers? You can also ask about diplomacy. How did those women need to negotiate with others to get what they needed? You can also support that with smaller research questions, just anything that comes into your head that you think will help you tell that story. Write it down so you can come back to it. My next tip for this research strategy is to make a list of all the key words to search for. So when you're doing your search, you're not just going to type women's suffrage, you're not just going to type Panama Canal. There are so many other parts of the story for you to look into. So things like the names of the people involved, the places where those events took place, the dates. So the dates are going to help you filter results on some of those online research databases, especially if you're looking at things like historical newspapers that have been put online. Look at the day when your event happened. You can also look at events and even concepts as your search terms, as you're looking for things. All right, the next part of the strategy is to think about what types of primary sources you might be looking for. And this is going to vary depending on your topic, depending on the time period that you're looking at. So a few of the examples that I have are newspapers, court cases, if there was a court case involved in your topic, video interviews. Now that's something that, will only exist for, a handful of decades in our history. If it's any older than, say, the 1960s, 1950s, you won't be able to find any video interviews on your topic. So you don't need to look there. You might even be looking for something like declassified government documents. It all depends on your topic. And finally, think about where you might find those sources and info related to your topic. So what collections will you be looking at? The four best types of websites, types of collections that you should look at are libraries, universities, archives, and museums. All right, so those are the people who digitize lots of primary sources and who make them available to you on their websites. But everyone has their own sort of little niche of what sort of sources they keep in their collections. So for example, some of these collections will get really specific, like the US Holocaust Museum. If you're doing a project on the Holocaust, that's the place to look. If you're doing something on British history, you might want to look at the British National Library. There are all these little niche collections, so it's up to you to find those. And a great resource for that is to go to nhd.org, go to their student resources. So you can find it nhd.org/student-resources, and then click on helpful research links. They have 100 different website collections, reliable websites where you can find primary and secondary sources. So you can do control find even and search for your topic and see if they have anything that's really specifically about that. They have them separated into categories, but that's a good place to look for those collections. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. That's my first little piece. So now I want to see what your questions are. And my colleague Isabella is here. She's in the chat. She's passing me your questions. And the first question that we got was about, thank you. All right, so what tips can you give to someone who doesn't have a topic with many sources? Which is a really good question. It's kind of a hard question. And I have a few different answers for it. They might not all apply to your situation, but hopefully there's someone else out there that will find my answers useful. So I had sort of 4 different thoughts about this. And my first thought was that it's possible that you might need to branch out in your research and look at some new collections. It's possible that your teacher has given you a list of good websites to do research on. I usually tell students, look at the Library of Congress, look at the National Archives. However, depending on your topic, those might not be the best places to look, especially if you have a topic that's more recent, say 1980s and later. You're not going to find a whole lot on those more traditional historical websites. Or similarly, if you're doing something that's related to pop culture or sports or things like that, there might be other collections that are better suited to you. So again, I strongly recommend you look at that long list that's on the NHD website and find something that's connected to your topic in there. My second thought was that it depends on your topic. Okay, it depends on the type of sources that you have. So if you just have a few sources, but they're really good ones and they give you a lot of information, then that might be okay. So for example, if your sources are a few different longer texts that give you a lot of information, give you a lot to analyze, that's okay. For example, literary works, books, novels, poems, those are all great sources where you might not have a lot of them to look at, but those ones are going to give you a lot. And then you'll just rely on other sorts of context. But they might be the main things that you focus on. So if you have a few really rich primary sources, that's okay. My other thought was that if you really, really can't find a whole lot of primary sources for your topic, think about the other parts of the story that you're going to tell. So you are not just telling the story of this one main event. You're also going to give us the context for it. You're also going to talk about its short-term impacts. You're going to talk about its long-term impacts. So think about how you can find primary sources for those other parts of the story. It's possible that that main event is going to be focused on just something very narrow and just a few sources are there. But how can you balance it with the beginning, middle, and end? Finally, my last thought was that if the few sources that you find are actually not all that useful, if they're not that rich, there's not that much to analyze, it might just be that you need to find a new topic. All right, and that's a hard thing to do, especially if you've been working on it for a little while. And it might not be that you need to find a totally new topic. Maybe you just need to find a slightly different angle on that topic or go a little bit broader. Maybe you're going a little bit too narrow. Okay, so those are my few pieces of advice if you can't find enough primary sources for your topic. Okay, anything else for now, Isabella, or should I move on to my next tip? All right, great. I'm going to go on to my next tip, but if at any point you think of a question that you want to get answered, go down to the description and click that Google form link. Okay, so my second tip for you all is to search smart. So I have a few tips here for doing online research, especially with databases or even with Google sometimes. So my first tip is to use Boolean search terms. These are the capital and, or, and not, and that's going to help you pair together different search terms or exclude different search terms. So say you're interested, I'm coming back to this women's suffrage example because it's serving me well here. So let's say you want to find things about women's suffrage and music. You can use that capital and between those two search terms, and it will make sure that all of the results that it returns to you have both women's suffrage and music in that web page, in that article. Or if you want to do something on baseball and television, you want to make sure that the article covers both baseball and television. Put that capital letter "and" in there. Let's say you're looking for something, but you're not sure which term they're going to use. So it might be something like you are searching about women's suffrage, but you're not sure if they were called suffragists or suffragettes at that time, because both terms were sort of used for different groups at different times. So you can use the capital letter "or" for that, and it'll give you results that have either one of those words or the other. Maybe not both, but definitely one of them. Finally, you can use the capital "not" to exclude results. So let's say you are looking at, the example that I like to use often is Martin Luther King, because he was named after Martin Luther, who's a famous 15th century monk in Germany. So let's say you want to search about Martin Luther and not Martin Luther King. You can search Martin Luther, not King, and get your results about your 15th century monk. And the other part of this tip is to use quotes to keep a phrase together. So for example, if you are searching for Martin Luther King and you want to keep that whole name together and not find Martin Luther alone, use quotes and it'll keep that whole phrase together in your search results. Okay, next tip. My next tip is really simple, just to combine the search terms from that list of keywords that I talked about in my last slide. Again, you're writing down things like Panama Canal and Theodore Roosevelt, who was president at the time that it was constructed. That will, allow you to focus your research a little bit, so that again, you're not just searching these really broad terms, you're searching them together to see how they interacted, to see how that story contained the both of them. My next tip is to use filters. So a lot of these online search databases will have filters in the left column menu so that you can narrow it down to a specific time period. Again, I find that really useful when I'm searching historical newspapers. I can narrow it down to the year or even the day when they reported on a certain event, and that can be really useful. You can also sometimes narrow it down by the type of format that primary source is. So if you really want to find an image that will help illustrate your topic, you can search on the Library of Congress website for photos, prints, and images, and it'll give you something visual. Okay, my next tip. All right, so this is sort of a big one. It says find reliable sites in Google using special search codes. So if you type the phrase site:.edu after your search terms, it will only return results from .edu sites. This is really useful because I know a lot of you have probably heard from your teachers that .com sites are not the best for doing research, since they are commercial sites, so they might have other purposes. But .edu is always good because it's always for educational purposes. .gov is always good because it's always official. So that's one tip. To exclude sites. For example, we don't want to get any .com sites. We're just going to put a minus sign at the beginning, and it will give us all those results without .com sites. We can also use this special search code to search specific websites. So loc.gov is the website of the Library of Congress. So if we wanted to search just the Library of Congress website, we could use that same little code right there. So I'm going to switch over to my web browser really quickly just to test these out for you. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to share my web browser. And I am just doing this right in Google. And I am clicking on, let's see, I'm going to do women's suffrage again. Women's suffrage. Site:.edu. .edu. And look at that. It's giving me .edu site, .edu, .edu. Let's try loc.gov. All right, and here, everything it shows me is going to be something that exists on the Library of Congress website. So I can click through and it gives me a research guide that's going to give me a lot of good stuff about this topic. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to my slideshow now. And Isabella, you can tell me if you've got anything in the chat. All right. So one question, it says, what do I do if I found a source that isn't available to download online? How do I get to it? Ooh, that's a really good question. So I'm trying to picture if you were talking about something like an image, because I've found that sometimes on the Library of Congress website, there are some images, some historical photographs that you can only view at the Library of Congress if you go there in person. And on the website, they only show you a tiny little thumbnail image that's not all that useful. And I don't think there's a good solution to that. I think you might just need to see if you can find another similar image that is available online, unfortunately. If you are talking about a text-based source, like for example, a book, I would recommend that you ask a librarian for that one. And a great place to do this is through the Enoch Pratt Free Library. The Enoch Pratt Free Library is the public library of Baltimore City, but it is also the location of the Maryland State Library. So anyone in Maryland can get an Enoch Pratt library card. That library card will allow you to access all of their online databases, which is really useful for research. I recommend it. They have lots of historical newspapers available online and other sorts of historical research websites. But they also have a sort of a, not exactly ask a librarian, but a similar function where you can contact a librarian and ask them questions about your research. And they would probably be able to help you find out how to get access to those text-based primary sources. For things like books, they might be able to have them shipped in from another library, for example, if it's not something that is in possession of the Enoch Pratt, or your local library branch might be able to do that as well. There's something called interlibrary loan, where they can ask other libraries for that book. So those are my sort of recommendations. That's sort of a tough one though. Sometimes there really just isn't much you can do about it. Okay, Isabella, no more questions for now? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move forward. Again, if you're thinking of any other questions, go ahead and pop them in that Google form and send them on over to us. My next piece of advice for you guys is to take effective notes as you are doing your research. This will help you as you're coming back to those sources. It'll remind you why you found a source so important. It'll make it easier to pick up where you left off doing your research. So the first thing that I have to say about this is to be organized, all right? Save all of your notes in a project folder with all of your other materials related to your History Day project. And make sure that in your notes themselves, if you're taking notes on the computer, include the links to those digital sources so you can easily go right back to them, have everything in the same place. Or if you're taking notes on a physical book or article, make sure you write down the title and the page number again, so that information doesn't get lost. Makes it really easy to do citations. You're basically working on the annotations as you go. So it's not a big daunting task, to go back at the end and try to make your annotated bibliography, keeping all the information super organized. Okay, my next tip is to take notes on the info that helps you answer your research question or questions. So remember, we talked about that on the first slide. Your research question is going to help you keep things focused. You're going to come across, depending on your topic, if you have a really big topic, you're going to come across a lot of information about it. But you want to keep your project focused enough that you can make a really strong argument about it. So you're allowed to cut out some things. You don't need to take notes on every single thing that you read. You are allowed to skim. You are allowed to skip over whole paragraphs or whole pages if they do not help you answer your research question. You can leave out any information that does not help you support your thesis once you write it. So say you find out, I've been using this example a lot lately, but if you find out that Abraham Lincoln's favorite ice cream flavor was strawberry, it's really fun to know that, but it's probably not going to help you support a thesis or answer a research question that has to do with his role in the Emancipation Proclamation or his accomplishments. Okay, so everything should be really focused on connecting it to the thesis, answering a bigger question about that event's significance, etc. All right, my next tip is to label your notes. So when you take a note, you might want to also make note of what part of the story this helps you understand and where it will fit into your project. So in other words, if you jot something down, does it help you understand the historical context, the main event, the short-term impacts, the long-term impacts? What part of the story are you getting at with that piece of information that you just noted down? And again, that's going to help you as you come back. You'll know where you wanted to put that information when you read it. Finally, my last tip in this section is that not all your notes will just be paraphrases. So paraphrase is just putting something into your own words. There's nothing wrong with it. But you should also make notes of some other thoughts that come through your head while you're doing your research. So you can also note down direct quotes that you find from primary sources. We don't suggest using direct quotes from secondary sources, but primary sources, those quotes, they might help you illustrate something that you're trying to say or something that you're trying to prove in your project. They might act as evidence for a point that you're trying to make. So you'll want to note those down so you can come back to them, so you can include them in your project, add a block quote in your website or on your exhibit board, etc. You will also want to write down any questions that come up as you're doing your research. This might lead you down different paths of things to research. It'll, help you come back to that central research question, help you support that central research question with these smaller questions that help you understand the big picture. Next, you'll also write down your own analysis of things. So your analysis is your interpretation of how things fit together, how one thing led to another, how the past fits together. It's not always something that's going to be right there written in black and white for you. You're the one who's going to be making a lot of those, noticing a lot of those patterns and making those connections. So write it down as you go so that you don't forget what you were thinking when you read that. And then finally, you are also, of course, going to have some of that paraphrased information where you're just writing again what the writer said into your own words. And I just have an example of what this might look like for you. So here I've got my notes in, oh, there we go. I've got my notes in a Google Doc, and I have made a little table for myself to keep it all nice and organized. So right here, I've got a link that goes right to that source, treaty with Russia. So I can pop back into it whenever I need to, but I also have the page numbers noted down for each of these notes that I'm making. You can see that the first note that I've made there is a direct quote. I thought it would be good at illustrating some of the context there. So I have just copied and pasted it, but I've made sure to put that paste in quotes so that I remember it's a direct quote, so that I don't try to pass it off as my own. And then I have a question. What does this mean exactly? I don't totally understand it. So I want to do a little bit more research to find out what it means. I have a paraphrase down here, something that I put into my own words that I read from that text. And then finally, I have my analysis. How am I making sense of this? How does this text fit into the story? Finally, in that right-hand column, you can see that I've put down where I plan to fit these into my project. The first couple notes give me more about the context, and the second two notes tell me about the short-term impact. So you're welcome to use this model. If you have a better way of taking notes, use what works best for you. All right, so let's see if we have any questions. I have one question that says, do you have any tips for doing interviews to include in projects? Ooh, that's a really good question. And let me think. So if you're doing interviews, well, first of all, I want to say interviews are great if you can get someone who experienced that time period. We don't usually recommend doing interviews with historians or other people who act as secondary sources, because in the History Day project, we want you guys to be the historians. But if you're interviewing someone to act as a primary source, someone who witnessed your event, someone who was alive at the time, you can look up online different questions that are good to ask in oral history interviews. And you'll want to ask things about, you know, how they were feeling at that time, what they observed. Maybe it's something that they watched on TV. You know, a lot of people, you know, when I was a kid, the one popular thing for history classes was, where were your parents when John F. Kennedy was shot? So a lot of the times they were just watching that on TV. Obviously they weren't there, but everyone has their own memory of that time and how they felt and what they remember, how their parents felt, how others around them responded to it. So if you're lucky enough to talk to a person who witnessed a historical event, it's going to be a lot about their experience, how they were feeling and what they were thinking at that time. All right, any other questions? All right, well, I am here. If there are any other questions, let me see. All right, I got one question that says, can I use a movie as a source? That's a really good question. Yes, absolutely. You can use a movie as a source, but be very careful about how you use it. So if you're using a movie that is a fictionalization of a historical event. So when I say that, I'm thinking about things like the movie Titanic or anything like that, where it was made years after the fact, about something that happened in the past, but it's not a documentary, then it's actually officially a primary source because it is an artistic production. It is not a scholarly production. So the people who made that movie were allowed to take liberties that people who write history books are not allowed to take, right? When you write a history book, everything needs to be purely nonfiction. When you're making a movie, you're making up the dialogue. We don't actually know what people said 100 years ago on the Titanic. So we can't use it as an exact secondary source, but we can use it as evidence for how people still found that event significant and moving and important, you know, almost 100 years later when that movie was made in 1997. So it's showing sort of historical memory, how people remembered that event 80 years later, for example. If you are doing your, if it's a historical movie and you're doing your project on that time period and maybe even movies in that time period, then it is a primary source. All right. So I know it gets a little bit complicated with that, but it depends on what your focus of your project is and whether that movie is sort of depicting an era in the past or if it is the primary source in itself. Okay. And then, of course, if it's a documentary, then it's a secondary source, and you can absolutely use it as a secondary source because there are probably interviews with historians and that sort of thing. All right. If there are no other questions right now, I'm going to go to my web browser. So just give me a second. Here we go. And I wanted to show you that website that I was talking about, the NHD student resources. I'm just going to actually go back to the beginning so I can show you guys how to get there. But this is nhd.org. So National History Day is this national organization who makes the rule book and decides on the theme for everyone all over the country who's doing this project. And if you go to for students and at the end, student resources, I'm going to click on that. And they've got all these different tabs, and I'm clicking on helpful research links. And you can look at all these different collections. So these are libraries, these are archives, museums, projects that are done by university groups, etc., all on their own little niche topic. Isabella, did we get in any of those questions, did we hear about what people's topics were? All right, we didn't hear about any topics. That's okay. But for example, look, we've got the Jackie Robinson Museum. It's so focused. It's just about Jackie Robinson. We got World War II, air and space. And you can see they've got these headings to help you navigate this. So libraries, archives, and directories. Let's see, if you're doing something from an even older era, there are resources in here for medieval history or even ancient history, because I know those sources are a little bit harder to find. So you'll definitely find some websites in here to help you out with that. These ones are US history. Within that, we've got Civil War, African American history, Native American, and so much more. So I really recommend that you guys check this out. I'll also just share with you, I can share with you our inquiry kits, just because I like to show you guys what's possible with these. So I've typed in thinkport.org/TPS, and I'm clicking on inquiry kits for social studies, this first upper left-hand box here. And what these are is basically primary source sets where we offer you some primary sources to use in your project. You can pick the collection that's right for you. So if you're doing a project within US history, you can go to US History Inquiry Kits, click there. And we have it organized by time period. So you can go through chronologically, find the time period that your topic belongs in, and see if we have a kit that relates to your topic in some way. So let's see. I'll just open a few of these up so you can see the types of topics that we have. So underneath the US in a time of crisis time period, 1929 to 1945. We've got the Great Depression, we've got Pearl Harbor, World War II European front, Japanese internment camps, the Victory Corps, and the Golden Age of Radio. So just to give you an idea of the type of topics that we have in here. We cover so many different things. There are 200 kits on this website right now, and they're all already pretty narrowed down. But if you take a look, you might be able to find something that will help you out. So if I go into one of these kits, I'll just go into, let's see, I'll go into Public Opinion, America and the War in Vietnam. So inside these kits, it's got a few thinking questions to get you starting the process of inquiry and thinking about how these sources will be useful to you, how they'll help you answer some of your own research questions. And then each kit has 5 primary sources, these ones, and 1 secondary source, which is in the bottom right-hand corner. And for any of these sources, you can click on them and it will link you out to the place on the internet where that source lives. So this source lives at the Library of Congress website. And we can learn more about this item as well. So I'm going to click through, and when I click through, I can actually zoom in a little bit. And then when I scroll down, it gives me more information about that source. So I've got the full title, the date it was published. I've got the name of the photographer. So if I wanted to learn more about the photographer and maybe why he was there and why he took that picture, I could search for him, search for his name. It will also tell me like what collections it's in. And if I scroll down even further, there's a button that you can press where you can just copy and paste the citation. So if you are doing all your citations just by typing them out and you're not using something like Noodle Tools or EasyBib, this will be really useful for you because you can just copy and paste the whole citation and put it in your bibliography. Okay, so I got another question. What do I do if I'm having a hard time connecting my topic to debate and diplomacy? I want to do something about art. All right, excellent, good question. So I would say if you haven't found a specific topic within art to do yet, I'll tell you right now, there are lots and lots of ways that you can connect art to debate and diplomacy. Even if so whether you're talking about strictly visual art, like paintings and sculpture and that sort of thing, or art more generally, so including things like music and literature, there's always debate going on about art, about whether it is good or bad, about whether it is offensive or not, about whether it should be banned or not banned. So you can look at things like censorship. That's a huge debate that has been going on for years and years. You can look at court cases that have happened because of, I can't think of any having to do with visual art specifically, but there were definitely some court cases relating to music, especially in the 90s, when some music was seen as offensive. There were cases that said that heavy metal bands were leading children to Satanism, and so that can be interesting to research. Or court cases that led the parental advisory label to be put on CDs, especially on rap CDs, because people found the language offensive. So those are some debates that you can look at. If you're interested in connecting diplomacy and art, you can look at the ways that art has been used to spread culture throughout the world, either in totally innocent ways or in covertly political ways. So for example, especially during the Cold War, this comes up a lot during the Cold War, the US State Department sent jazz musicians overseas to the Middle East, to the Soviet Union, to spread American culture in a way, because they saw jazz as being a great example of American individualism and a way to combat the socialist kind of collectivism. And this was also, you could also see this in visual art through Jackson Pollock. So the State Department also really promoted Jackson Pollock. And if you're not familiar with him, I'll just Google him right now. But he's the one who did these paintings where he basically just sprayed paint all over the canvas. So there you've got some examples of his work. But the US State Department thought it was great because it was a great example, again, of US individualism and uniqueness. I always tell students, I recommend you try to find a glimmer of both of those concepts in your topic. So if you pick one that leans more toward debate, how did people use diplomacy to negotiate and compromise? If you take one of those topics that's more related to diplomacy, how did debate lead to that diplomacy, or how did that act of diplomacy spark controversy or debate among people? So those are just a few ideas that I have. But yeah, there are so many different directions you can go with this. Think about controversies, think about how art has been used to spread culture, things like that. I'm sure you'll find lots of great stuff. All right, I've got another question in here from Lucia. Can my topic be about the negative consequences exclusively pertaining to the event? The topic is the Japanese American internment camps. Yeah, I would say that that event in itself is overwhelmingly negative. And you are welcome to just talk about the negative consequences of that event. I don't think that anything good came out of Japanese internment. So yeah, absolutely. All right. So no more questions for now. Let's see if I have anything else to share with you guys. So I'm going to go back to the ThinkPort site that I was just showing you guys, this thinkport.org/TPS. And there's one other little aspect of this site that you guys might find useful. So I'm scrolling up to the top of the site, and in the top right column menu, there's research learning modules, and you can click on this. You can click on the text or the image. And this has a bunch of interactive modules that are sort of take you step by step on some of the skills that you might find useful as you're doing your History Day project. So for this phase, when you're doing your research, I'm going to scroll down. You can see that there are all these different topics: writing a thesis statement. I'm going to go to digging for historical sources, since that's what you guys are doing when you're doing research. You're digging for sources. And this is what the modules look like. So each one is about 6 or 7 pages. This one is just sort of an intro page, which gives you some objectives and a little video to introduce the topic. And it'll just sort of reinforce some of the things that I told you today. The best ways to go about creating a research strategy, and some tips for how to carry that out. So this one has some reminders about primary and secondary sources. It's got some research tips. Oh, and look, it actually has tips for doing an interview. I would say that nowadays everyone is super comfortable with using Zoom or Google Meet or other conferencing software like that. So you could even do your interview over Zoom if you can organize something like that. And these modules give you the chance to try out some of these things on your own. So you can sort of determine where you think a source like this might be found. And I'll tell you right now, if you're thinking about using historical newspapers, which I think are an awesome source for just seeing how events were presented to the public, you can go to, and I'll tell you the answer right now. The answer is Chronicling America, and the archive, I believe. It's also in the archives of the Library of Congress. But Chronicling America has historical newspapers from the 1700s through to the 1960s. So that is a great place to find out how people were reporting on those historical events. Okay. All right, Isabella, any more questions? Or is there anything that you can think of that I should be sharing? No more questions. Shall we? When you say MD, do you mean Maryland focused sources? Okay, sure. I'm going to go to the Pratt Library. It's prattlibrary.org, and that's actually one of the sources that we have linked to down there in the description. So again, I told you this is the Enoch Pratt Free Library's website. Anyone located in Maryland can get a library card. I am going to go to research. So just remember that you're not searching the main collection of library books that they have. Instead, you're going to research so you can look at their research databases. And I'm going to say view all databases. And one of the ones that I really like for Maryland topics, if you're doing a local topic, is, actually, I'm not sure how to get to it from here. Let me see if I can just Google it. Well, you can find a lot of stuff here. So there are many different historical databases. You can see there's one on African American history. There are newspapers. There's a research collection on civil rights. I'm going to check out Digital Maryland, which you can also find through Enoch Pratt. I just can't remember how to do that right now. So it's digitalmaryland.org. And this is a great place to go for Maryland-based primary sources. I think that doing a local history topic is great because it's super unique. You know, you can take a national topic like women's suffrage or like the civil rights movement, and you can find out how it played out on a local level. And then, you know, if you are interested in making your way through the contest, you know that nobody in Colorado or California is going to choose a Maryland topic. This is all up to you guys to choose something that took place in Maryland. You might find it personally interesting if you can find something that happened in your town or in your county. And yeah, it's a great way to just put a unique spin on a topic. So I'm going to click on View Collection. And this is a collection of greeting cards from holidays past. And actually, it looks like this is not all Maryland, but it was maybe collected by someone in Maryland. And if I click on collections, I can see all sorts of different Maryland-based topics. The aftermath of the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904, for example. So it looks like there are some photos, some illustrations like this one, books, etc. You can find information about the agricultural industry, the B&O Railroad, which was a super important railroad company very early in American history, very early in the history of railroads. Okay, there's so much here to discover. So if you're doing a local topic, that's a great place to do it. And they also have oral histories on this site. And I'm pretty sure, do they have the oral histories that we produced? There's some, maybe, there's a collection somewhere that has oral histories that Maryland Humanities, our organization, actually helped to create. And you can find some of them actually within the ThinkPort inquiry kits. So that's something that's super special that we're proud of. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint right now, and I think we're gonna wrap up now. So if you have any last questions, go ahead and send them in really quickly. If not, you're welcome to email me, or you can wait until the next office hour. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. So our next MHD student office hour is going to be Thursday, December 2nd at 5 p.m. So that's 4 weeks from today. And for that one, we'll focus a little bit more on doing the writing for your History Day project. Or again, any topic that you are interested in related to History Day. So if you're still trying to get through the research, that's normal. Any historian is going to keep on doing research as they're doing their writing. If you are still in an even earlier stage, you can drop in a question. If you're done with your writing, you can drop in a question about the contest or about putting it all together. We're happy to answer any questions you have. So to get notified about this event coming up, what you can do is you can hit the subscribe button below for the Maryland Humanities YouTube channel. It's an educational channel, so nobody can get mad at you for it. And then click the little bell so you can get notifications for the next time that we go live with this event. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a pleasure to answer your questions as best I could. And I hope you come back next time. All right, thanks all.